That's right? That's what I see in the program.
We're live. So welcome everyone to our podcast and our seminar. We have our Master of Ceremony who will introduce the seminar and welcome everybody, and we'll begin the session.
Thank you. I wanted to welcome you to the Education, Perception, Motivation and Learning Research Symposium hosted by Charles Darwin University. My name is Amy Norman and I am an early childhood teacher, lecturer and PhD student researcher here at CDU, as well as your Masters of Ceremony for this symposium. This symposium was born out of the need for intellectual discussion about research, something which drives innovation and exploration. Today, I challenge all of you to listen and question and explore what is said in relation to what you know. Consider with respect the passion and expertise in the room as well as the research. Today, you will hear from a range of experts and we will invite you to listen and consider. Tomorrow, we will invite you to a more intimate intellectual conversation in a panel discussion with the presenters. I'd just like to take a moment for the people in the room just to acknowledge housekeeping. So if there's bathrooms just outside, there's water as well. And if there's anything else that we might need during the symposium, feel free to ask. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which I stand on today. I stand here today on the land of the Larrakia people, the traditional custodians of this place we now call Darwin, to pay my respects. Growing up here, my life has been intertwined with this saltwater country, from the Whitestone Cliffs that hug Nightcliff, Casuarina and East Point coastline, where my grandmother, my mother and me and my children have played, collected shells and marvelled in the dangerous beauty of the water. To the Larrakia bushlands stretching 50 kilometres out of Darwin, where I have swum in the streams and creeks and eaten wild fruits from the trees. These places, with their distinctive smells and stark beauty of their harshness, are the backdrop of my most cherished memories and the foundation of what I call home. My connection to this place is deepened by the personal relationships I have with the Larrakia people. Not just people, but my First Nation friends and family members who not only grew up with me on this beautiful country, but who embrace me in their lives, sharing their culture and their dreams for a united future. Together we work and live to nurture Darwin, our home, making it a place of respect, love for country, shared knowledge and shared futures. As we embark on this symposium, let us acknowledge all Larrakia people whose profound connection to this land enriches our collective understanding. May their stewardship and enduring spirit inspire our academic explorations today. So, that leads me to my first presenter. I would like to introduce Dr. Andrew J. Martin, a Scientia Professor of Educational Psychology and co-chair of the Educational Psychology Research Group in the School of Education at the University of New South Wales. He is also Honorary Research Fellow in the Department of Education at the University of Oxford. He specialises in student motivation, engagement, learning and quantitative research methods. His recent rankings of Scopus-based citations, Andrew is listed in the top 20 of the world's 85,000 plus authors indexed in education. He is also listed in the top 5 of the latest 5-yearly international rankings of the most published educational psychologists. He is consulting editor for the Psychological Review, Journal of Education of Psychology, and Educational Psychology, and serves on numerous international editorial boards. He has written 3 books on student motivation for practitioners and parents, published in 5 languages. Please welcome Andrew.
Thank you very much, Anya and Amy. So if people want to see my face, I will shift this. Yes? Yes. Okay, great. Okay. Thank you very much, Amy, for that lovely introduction, and thank you, Anya, for pulling this together. And welcome to those folk in the audience here, and also for those folk online. Thank you, Amy, especially for that quite detailed and warm acknowledgement of country. It's really nice to hear your connection to Larrakia people. So I would also like to add my gratitude and pay my respects to Larrakia people and elders, past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to pay my respects to Aboriginal land where I live and I've raised my family. It's Wongal country in Sydney, and Wongal country is along the unfortunately named Cooks River, named after James Cook, because we just sit just inside Botany Bay where he came in. But the name of that river isn't widely known, and I think it's becoming more. There's a greater effort to recognise it, and it's an Aboriginal first language. It's referred to as Guluyara, which means where pelicans rest, and so it's quite amazing to see that you can see pelicans in that area still, which is no small feat because I understand it's the second most toxic and polluted river in the country, and so as usual we've done a fine job of ruining that, but efforts are underway to clean up that beautiful river, and so I'd like to pay my respects to the Wongal people, elders past, present, emerging, down southeast way. I'm, as Amy indicated, I'm an educational psychologist, and most of my research, I've been research only for all my academic life, and so I've had an opportunity to do a lot of research and dip my toes into lots of diverse strands of research, and welcome. But the centrepiece of pretty much everything I do is student motivation and engagement, and so having those two constructs as a sort of a constant through my research life means that I can explore lots of diverse issues around those. And so today you'll be seeing one slice or side hustle of mine, and that's the sort of the biological aspects to education and psychology and what we've been doing in that space. But we do a lot of other research related to student motivation, and so that will be looking at issues around gender. We have been conducting an ongoing program of research looking at motivation engagement among First Nations kids in schools, and indeed one of research project that I'm involved in has received, I think, the largest actually education funding to Aboriginal research by the Paul Ramsay Foundation. That's led by Associate Professor Kevin Lowe at UNSW, and so I've been having a small part in that, but also looking at issues around cross-cultural issues around motivation engagement, looking at different measurement and quantitative approaches to assessing motivation engagement, as well as the pedagogy around student motivation engagement. So you can see that I sort of, as I say, dip my toes in lots of areas, but a constant are these two constructs: student motivation and engagement. So, as I indicated, today I'll be looking at, again, as I mentioned, a sort of a side hustle. In fact, I feel like everything I do is a side hustle, which is why I say that motivation is always there. So I'm not sort of jumping around in a chaotic way, although sometimes it feels that way. There is a constant through all of that. And so today I want to look at what we refer to as new generation approaches to student motivation engagement, and in particular the biological aspect to that. And so, theories, and most of my work deals with high school students or adolescents, and so you'll be seeing a fair bit of that today. And so pretty much every theory of development and adolescent development has recognised the role of biology and in how people function, including how students function in the academic domain. And so I think Learner captured it quite nicely a couple of decades ago, saying that childhood and youth may be defined as the lifespan period in which most of a person's biological, cognitive, psychological and social characteristics are changing in an interrelated manner. And so I'd like to sort of take that idea and show you how we operationalise that and explore that in our research domain. And so biopsychological perspectives, they look at this interrelationship between mind and body. And so the joint operation of biology, of neuropsychology, of physiopsychology, how these come together and sit alongside classic research constructs. And so most of us in education, we'd be involved in what we would call classic approaches to motivation and engagement research, or classic approaches to, when we're lecturing about student motivation to undergrads and postgrads, we often are leaning on research that are conducted in classic ways. And by classic, we're usually talking about self-reports in surveys. They might be domain-specific self-reports or more global reports. Generally this week or this term, students will rate themselves. They're often retrospective, so we'll ask students in a survey, generally how motivated are you? And by definition, what they're doing is they're reflecting on how they were that day, that week, and so on. Other classic approaches we might rely on observation or ratings by others. So often we'll use parent reports and teacher reports in this research, and it's fair to say we have learnt a lot this way. We believe students do have good insight into what they're thinking and how they're feeling and what they, and what their teacher's doing. And parents and teachers have unique insights on students, and when we put those together, we have learnt a lot. And I think, it's also fair to say that these are, when we correlate these with objective measures, like achievement and attendance and things like that, these self-report measures are in the main reasonably valid, but they're not perfect. And there are limits to these approaches, and so they don't get at contemporaneous, real-time, in-the-moment stuff, which is what teachers and students and parents are always dealing with. You're always dealing with stuff in real time, and so because we can't capture that so well through these classic measures. To some extent, what we can know about children and young people is hampered or impeded. And so leaning on other measures or integrating other approaches is certainly something worth considering. And so these other approaches are increasingly being integrated into educational psychology, which is my area. And so this sort of objective research will include things like, research into hormones, research into psychophysiological dimensions such as galvanic skin responses and so on, like electrodermal activity, EDA. This research will also look at neuropsychological processes, and so brain waves and so on through EEG, brain activity, and as well as things like nutrition and diet, how this affects students' academic functioning. And so, in the scheme of educational psychology, these are referred to. We refer to these as they're relatively novel because most ed psych research is that classic research I was describing, and they're relatively under-implemented relative to, especially these days, now that they're very accessible and cost-effective ways to collect these data. they're under implemented. That's changing, but nevertheless it still is. And so we refer to these as new generation. In a decade, I don't think I'll be able to use that term. Probably in 5 years I won't be able to. And so new generation data, they'll be sort of referring to it broadly in that way, is a data that can further inform or augment or supplement what we know from those traditional approaches, those classic approaches that we've often used in educational psychology. And so that brings us to what I want to talk about today. And so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about those two pillars, motivation and engagement, because that's what everything today is fit around. And so it's these biopsychological approaches to investigating students' motivation and engagement. So I want to just talk about what motivation engagement constructs I'll be looking at. And that's also my positionality. And so that I need to, let you know what the world according to Andrew looks like. You've probably got a fair idea of it already, but understand that what I'm sharing and the approaches I take and the interpretation of my data come from a position. I'll talk about that briefly. And then I want to just move through 5 research studies that we've conducted that it's not meant to be a comprehensive, comprehensive treatment of biology in the ed psych world. They're more showcasing what can be done and provide an insight into what the bio data adds to what, when it sits along educational psychology measures, what each of them affords us to assist our understanding of children and young people. And so after I share those studies, I want to, what I think point to the yields of jurists would say, the minute you introduce an extrinsic pressure to do something, you activate performance concerns rather than mastery concerns. And performance concerns will come with anxiety and fear of failure, as opposed to other students who are mastery oriented. And even though it's challenging, they perceive it as challenge rather than threat. And so, yes, from the get-go, you're activating performance concerns and there's anxiety.
Did you want to?
Okay. Thank you, folks, and thank you online as well.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That was fascinating.
It was really good.
It was very good. I had no idea you'd done so many interesting things. Showing my ignorance there. But those studies were really, really interesting. I can see that everyone online has been loving it and watching it, so that's great. For us in the room, we might need a minute before we have our next person.
You can introduce Andrew.
Okay. For those here, Professor Andrew Lyon currently works at the School of Foreign Languages, Sunari University of Technology. He specialises in the methodology of teaching foreign second languages and has a special interest in the use of modern technology to enhance learning since the 70s. He is one of the pioneers of technology-enhanced language learning in Australia. Previous to this appointment, he was Professor and Chair of the Department of Foreign Languages and Literatures at Western Illinois University in the United States. He's got a long history, everyone, so just bear with me. Prior to that, he had been Professor of Humanities and Director of the Center for the Study of Languages at Rice University, Houston, Texas, USA, and Professor and Head of School of Languages and International Education at the University of Canberra in Australia. So he's quite an international force, isn't he? We love him. He's not here, so I can say all of this while he's out of the room. He has held professorial appointments and been head of department in 2 other universities in Australia, James Cook and Bond University. His current research interests are in the area of self-adjusting and self-organising, language/culture, learning environments based on rhizomatic approaches to language and culture, learning and the generation of personal learning environments within a 21st century perspective. As a consequence, he is also interested in the development and use of multimedia databases in language, culture, learning, teaching and learning. And I welcome him to present. This is Dr. Andrew Lyne.
Thank you. Oh, that's me. Okay. Any interesting questions? All right. Where am I? Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Good. All right. Hello. I seem to recognize everybody. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this thing, which is perceptual optimization in second language learning, and I also call it "Welcome to Font." Those of you who are into language out there will recognize the joke. Those of you who are not, it may not matter. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about perception. I want to talk about optimization, both in general and specifically in language learning. Oops, what happened?
Arrows.
Wrong. Okay, so thank you for being here, for inviting me. I'm very happy, as you can see. It's a short presentation. Well, it's not a short presentation. It's a short presentation in terms of time, which is potentially complicated, but actually quite accessible. And I'm going to basically follow the same kind of model that Andrew was following, and I'll talk about 8 projects, not 5, but in a much shorter way. And to that extent, it will be less detailed and perhaps less informative. But anyway, we'll see. So I'll deal with it as a series of short stories, basically. I don't know, maybe they can still see. And we'll talk a little bit about theoretical outcomes and practical outcomes. And for those of you who are into language learning, him, I think that's it, and Anya, and me.
People online.
And the people online, it may be okay. So I'll talk from the perspective of additional language learning. This is one of the latest crazes. It's no longer L2 or EFL or second foreign language learning. It's an additional language. So this is what we're going to deal with a little bit. We'll talk about the separation of mind and body, verbal tonal theory, precision language education, rhizomatic learning systems in passing. Well, we're not going to do that because it's just going to, flood us with stuff. And most importantly, what I call, and Anya and I've been talking about a lot recently, which is the interface between perception and learning, the connection between perception and learning. Now, I'll briefly outline some of these things and talk to you about some projects which we've done in Asia and in Australia. Let's talk a little bit about mind and body. There seems to be a functional dichotomy between mind and body. Well, we don't know where the mind lives and where the body lives. We can go back to the 17th century and start talking about Descartes and so on, but I'm going to assume that there's a thing called the mind, and I'm going to assume that there's a thing called the body. And the mind wants things or thinks things, and the body, and it is unfortunately the body that must do the work. And I say unfortunately because as time goes by, the body gets less able to do some things. But the body also keeps the mind alive. Unless we go into a spiritual dimension, that's how it is. at least for the moment, with us. So we can think of operating in a language, and this is actually pretty important, we can think of operating in a language as a whole body activity. It's not just the mind working, it's the mind and the body working together. And then if we can go beyond that into looking at language activity as something which goes beyond just words and grammar, especially if you add things like self-synchrony, interactional synchrony, proxemics, which is the spatial relationships between people, gaze, how people look at each other, how people standing in relationship to each other, rhythmic structures of the body, rhythmic structures of language, rhythmic structures of conversations, issues of posture and posturing, and more. All of these are reflected, by the way, in physiological activity. They don't happen by magic and without involving the body somewhere, and therefore without involving the physiological activity. So in order to get the learning theory right, we must also seriously consider the role of the body. Well, when teaching people or talking to people, we tend to behave as though we are talking directly to their minds. Right? I'm talking to you now and it's going straight into your mind. Well, it ain't necessarily so. When we talk to people, we talk to them through their bodies, right? I mean, through your ears, through your nerves, through something which is not the mind, and it's somehow by magic inside your head, maybe, it connects to your it connects to your mind. And that involves issues of neurology and perception. So perception I tend to see essentially as a meaning-making filter which establishes the connection between body, mind, and the world. It's always there. It is ever present, and all of our understandings are mediated automatically by it and enables us to learn. But it also acts as a barrier. What we know can stop us from getting to what we want to get into our heads. Okay, so logically, and so it can act, that's what I mean by it can act as a barrier. What we know can stop us from learning. I mean, as a trivial example, people say, or summarize it by saying, oh, my first language prevents me from learning my second language. I can't hear the sounds of the second language because of my first language. I think it's a bit of a trivial definition, but anyway, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. And one of the things, and that last line is actually quite important, logically, perception and learning go together, but we often keep them apart. And we keep them apart because of the ways in which science is organized. Disciplinary boundaries. So let me introduce you to verbotonalism very quickly. Verbotonalism, or verbotonal theory of perception. It's a theory of perception proposed by Professor Petar Guverina from Zagreb University. He's now dead, sadly for me, because he was a good friend. And it is a theory of perception is, I would argue, a theory of meaning necessarily. Its initial focus, the initial focus of verbotonalism was on pronunciation and intelligibility. And one of the really kind of important things of the theory is that it thinks of the notion of providing optimal language input, the best possible language input that you can have, or the best possible conditions for it. At the level, and I'm going to talk about pronunciation for a while, and I'm going to use pronunciation as a general example of learning. It's a convenient example, and we can deal with other issues surrounding it later. So a person's speech production reflects on how they perceive and understand various aspects of speech. Thus, changing the learner's perception gives rise to changes in their production. Okay? Change the perception and you will will change the production. But how do you do that is, of course, a bit problematic. Perceptual restructuring can depend on highly individualized input, or if you prefer to call it that, optimal input for that person. Highly individualized input. How do you do it? So our little research group is using verbotonalism to investigate that interface between perception and learning. It's a key concept. We're conscious that the act of learning requires an act of meaning-making as part of learners, on the part of learners, and that perception is the first line of engagement with the world and filters what is allowed to reach our brain for further processing. Perception, therefore, has a gatekeeping function where understood familiar signals are retained and reinforced. Others are rejected. There's a phenomenon called the now or never bottleneck, which is that if you, as you listen to the language which comes into your ears, there is a limit which is set by short-term memory on the amount of stuff that you can process at any one time. And if you don't process it, then you're in big trouble. The result of that is that there seems to be a mechanism for processing large chunks of language rather than language on a sound-by-sound basis or a whatever you want to call it basis, small pieces. And to make matters worse, the knowledge that we already have can act as a barrier to the knowledge that we want to get. So let's have a little word about awareness raising. In verbotonal theory, awareness raising is a key concept. Awareness raising, it doesn't get into your head. It doesn't get into your head unless there is an act of awareness which occurs. Now, there are many techniques for raising learners' awareness of pronunciation. Awareness raising is a key component also of learning in general, and you need a theory of knowledge to be able to deal with that. A theory of knowledge construction and learning. And so we have been working on some stuff which came initially from Gattegno in '87 and from me and others. Traditional verbotonal practice relies on a combination, and just to set the scene, traditional verbotonal practice relies on a combination of large and small body movements, dance movements, symbolic representations of sound and prosody by verbotonal teachers who will make these kinds of macro gestures or micro gestures, or who will tell you to dance to the rhythm of the language. Hello, how are you? Okay? And that kind of work works reasonably well, works quite well, but it's a combination of gestures and hearing and production, matching input and output, and so on. Modern approaches to traditional verbotonal practice does all of that stuff. But one of the techniques which has been used for a long time now, but forgotten in most places, is the use of filtered speech. You take language and you filter it through analog or digital filters. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Now, in recent times, we as the people who work with me, have chosen to focus on filters, specifically on what you're filtering. And often this filtering is what's called low-pass filtering. Low-pass filtering means that you keep the low frequencies in speech and you remove the high frequencies. Now, if you've never heard, I hope this is going to work. If you've never heard low-pass filtered language before, here's an example. We're going to low-pass filter at 320 hertz. If you look at this this picture here, that's the representation of a sentence. That is the intonation curve of the sentence. And I hope we're going to be able to hear it now. So here we go. It's a stupid sentence. Hello. I made it stupid because I wanted big intonation changes that you could hear easily. So, hello. How are you? All right. So that's a normal sentence. It's unfiltered, right? You've heard it, you understand it. And so now we're going to bring in the filtered version. Can you see that on this chart here, there are some black lines which go up? And you can see that on this one here, there are no black lines which go up because we have removed all the sound frequencies above 320 hertz. And this is what it sounds like. Okay, everybody laughs. Andrew, welcome to the world of overtonalism. We stop laughing after a while, but it sounds funny. You get the pattern?
I really feel it in my feet.
Absolutely, and that's actually one of the points I was going to make.
Oh, sorry.
No. But listen, you can do this. You can do this. Listen to the contrast, not the contrast, the complementarity. It's the same sentence. It's exactly the same. It's exactly the first sentence. Filter. So what? So low-pass filtering releases the prosodic structure of utterances. What's called the fundamental frequency of the voice, which is the zero formant in the voice, which is below the normal vowel and consonant formants. It is a constant in the production of speech. It's the vocal cord vibrations. If you put your hands on your throat and you go ah, that vibration that you hear is what causes basically what causes the intonation and what causes F0. This makes it more salient. Okay, so now you have actually heard for the first time maybe the intonation only of a sentence. But one of the interesting things is this thing here. It targets the right brain. At least that's part of the dogma of verbotonalism. It targets the right brain and is reputed to lower the processing load, partly by removing the need to process words and also by redistributing the load toward the right brain. And we'll talk about that more shortly. As Amy said, it also impacts the body as a whole. The body is particularly sensitive to low frequencies. And Amy said she felt it through her feet. One of the techniques of verbotonalism is to have floorboards, which are or specially designed floors where people can stand and feel the intonation pattern of the language. And by the way, this is applied not only to language learning, but it's also applied to the rehabilitation of the deaf. So typically students would listen to the patterns and dance to them, so they'd hear, or they could walk it. I'm not good at walking or dancing, but anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, how do you connect the intonation pattern with your way of doing things? So to that extent, it's already individualized. We've moved, or I have moved, and those working with me have moved, towards a focus on assessing the impact of filters only. In other words, no dancing, just filters. And you can still feel it, of course. And the speakers are very good here, by the way. Okay? So while studying intonation patterns is unsurprisingly, meant to bring about improvements in intonation production, Verbotonal dogma also claims that the entire pronunciation system will improve. So you're not just fixing the intonation, but you're also fixing the other pieces of language, all the phonemes of language. But what's interesting is that hard data on this is really scarce. It's been around since 1950 something, and I have yet to see, and I've read almost everything there is, and I have yet to see data which actually has numbers and statistics which tells us what was improved and what wasn't. Anyway, some more recent studies seek to test this claim, and I think it's an important one because if we can actually change the entire system by working on intonation only, then we have a very efficient way of helping people pronounce better. Okay? Okay, but it's not only the low-pass filtering that can be used, as you saw there. We can also have what are called bandpass filters. Bandpass filters allow you to select pieces of the spectrum, or actually this way, pieces of the spectrum that you can listen to. Typically, in the past, these bandpass filters were set in octave-wide bands. An octave is, what's an octave?
8.
Well, yes. An octave is basically a range of frequencies where the top of the range is twice the bottom of the range. Okay, so if you start at 512, 1024 hertz gives you an octave. And so it's pretty wide, right? It's a pretty wide range. In addition, in verbotonalism, each language has its own optimal frequencies. It has its own set of frequencies for native speakers and also corrective optimals according to the linguistic group attempting to learn. In other words, native speakers hear in one way, and if you want to fix the pronunciation of non-native speakers, then you give them a different set of signals to help them change their perceptions and change their pronunciation. So before everybody, no one here is going to do it, but if I was in a normal language setting, people would say, what about English as a lingua franca? What about racism? What about, what's the other thing? Identity studies. It is okay to have an accent. And the answer is yes, of course it is okay to have an accent. The point is not to deny people or to remove people's accents, but the point is to enable them to be intelligible. And that's an advantage, right? I mean, you understand me with my funny accent. She has a funny accent, her own accent. He's got a different accent. You've got a different accent. But we understand each other, right? Because there are commonalities between us which are sufficient for us to negotiate meanings between us. Now, so we're extending these studies, and we will see with the first project that I'll mention briefly what I'm talking about in terms of corrective optimals. This is important. Note that the descriptions will be very short, and anything that isn't clear can be clarified tomorrow or not at all, but in a way, there's a lot to talk about. But before I go further through this, let me take you on a short side trip about 21st century society. 21st century society has evolved new expectations. In particular, it does this: fix my problems, not your problems, and do it my way. It's true, isn't it? Yeah. People now expect in normal daily life highly personalized solutions. Your printer breaks down, what do? You go to YouTube, you find the solution for yourself, and if it doesn't work, you go and find it again. And that's a kind of personalization. And they're getting it. People are getting personalized help. But what's also interesting is that people are learning from it. So In other words, we kind of know that people do know how to learn if they want to learn. So the issue of motivation, I think, is actually very important. If you really want to learn, well, you probably will find a way to do it. And this is kind of characteristic of rhizomatic learning, or what I call self-organizing learning environments, which are basically the same sort of thing, except that SOLS is a term invented by a guy called Sugata Mitra with his hole-in-the-wall experiments. And rhizomatic learning is something we've been doing, and others too, but rhizomatic language learning is actually not very current. Anyway, this is consistent with individualization focus of verbotonal theory. Rhizomatic learning systems, I'm going to show you this very briefly, and then we'll move on. And this is part of a description. Dynamic, non-hierarchical, exploratory, consultative, nomadic, supportive, and resource-rich systems. You can, if you want to read the article, I can refer you to it. But one of the things that is happening is that technology is now making that kind of self-managed environment more possible through the availability of such things as search engines. And of course, now we have ChatGPT and other large language models. So, this concern is reflected in educational research with a growing recognition that people are different and require personalized or individualized assistance. Not at the level of what Andrew was talking about, have a good breakfast or have this, but actually in trying to deal with these issues. The issues are moment-to-moment difficulties that people encounter during the learning experience. So if I happen to want to learn to say the French sound U as in bus, by the way, bus, as I pronounce it, is a French word, but if I pronounce it the English word, in the English way, I'll say bus. This is a bus, B-U-S, but they can't say bus, and something tells them that they can't say bus. They either have somebody telling them you're not pronouncing correctly, or they hear it themselves, and then they try to find a solution. That is a problem that student A may have, but not student B, not student C, not student D. But for student A, it's a real problem. Student D, it's not a problem at all. How do you deal with those things in the context of a learning program or of a language learning program? Now, connected with this concept is just-in-time and just-in-case learning, with a shift which seems to be occurring away from just-in-case learning in favor of just-in-time. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do just-in-case learning. Just-in-case learning means, hey, you need to know this stuff just in case you need it someday. I still remember fondly the solution for calculating the roots of quadratic equations. But I haven't used it for the last 50 years, roughly. Occasionally, I demonstrate it to my students, if I can remember it at that time, if I can remember it properly. So let me talk to you about project number one. Project number one is identifying and testing optimals for a pair of vowels in English, E as in ship, and E as in sheep. And there's a book written called Ship or Sheep, which is used to teach pronunciation. Okay? This is a very common problem in Asia. And this is done by my student, Wen Feng Wei, who's got his doctorate out. Actually, he did a beautiful doctorate on it. I'll try to summarize some of the things that he did. He identified 4 potential optimal frequencies or frequency bands. Remember I talked about discontinuous bands before? He identified some frequency bands. Not low pass as we heard, but it's a different way of helping perception. Well, we took sentences like, will this work? No, it won't work. Okay, good. We took sentences like ship or sheep. Come on, surely.
You want to write?
Yeah, we got it. Okay. Oh, you're so well prepared. Thank you. Right. So we took. This is a ship, and this is a sheep, and we took this. We cut this sound out of the sequence. We substituted for it a set of possible optimals. So we had discontinuous frequency bands in there. One set for this and another set for that one. And then we gave it to students to listen to, and we asked them to repeat the words. And it was quite interesting. If you listen to them, you notice that as they listen to the changed frequency bands, their production changes too. And so you say, you offer them, in this case, you offered them 4 potential optimals for E and 13 potential optimals for E, and he discovered which ones worked, and I'll show you which ones worked in a moment. This is what he discovered, that 89.2% of the students improved or preferred a particular set of frequencies, frequency number 1, and 10.8% of students preferred frequencies number 2. By the way, this was a blind study. It was an experimental study, pre-test, post-test, rater study with blind ratings. The improvement ratio of the experimental group over the control group is as indicated there, 3.69% for E and 4.83%. That's 369% improvement ratio and 483% improvement ratio for E. That's the experimental group over the control group. We had a very high or a very good p-value, and I can't remember the effect size here. Tests were also performed for perception as well as for comprehensibility and fluency, and the experimental group outperformed the control group on all measures. And that was with filtering only. Just as an example, here are some of the filters. This is for E. Just to show you, I don't expect you to remember or understand this. I just want to show you the kind of stuff that's involved. He had a frequency band of 0 to 320 hertz. In other words, an intonation component plus a frequency band which is a third of an octave, centered at 2,715 hertz, 89.2% preference by the students. And not just preference, but better production. Doing a pre-paired sample test, we had very, very significant, I don't know if you can say very significant, any significant, with Cohen's D, and very large effect sizes in some cases. Okay. I want to talk to you a little bit now about reducing the processing load. You've heard of FONF? No, you haven't. FONF in language work means focus on form, which is a way of focusing on the grammar, supposedly in a meaningful way. And you've also heard of FONFs. FONFs is actually focus on forms. It's a more traditional way of looking at the grammatical system. Well, I'm going to introduce you to something different. So welcome to FONF, which means focus on the physical. Focus on the physical. And focus on the physical, in this case, means this. Okay, low frequency filtering targets the right brain. It tries to raise awareness of prosodic features which bring about load reduction to cerebral processes. Remember, I told you about that before. Well, this is a logical outcome of verbal tunnel theory. Here's the problem again. Data are non-existent, and the whole hypothesis requires verification. So my colleague and ex-doctoral student from Kunming Medical University in China, Dr. Tsai Jirui, and I decided to test the possibility of extending optimization, reducing the load even more, and testing this hypothesis as to whether there is a reduction in load. So what we did with the dichotic signal, we took a dichotic signal and we sent, and here's the issue, if we send each brain hemisphere the information it is designed to deal with, then the processing effort might be reduced and perhaps redirected to other activities. A dichotic signal is when you send one signal to one ear and a different signal to the other ear. We sent a variety of signals to each ear, which were, actually there were four varieties, both ears filtered, both ears unfiltered. In other words, where the filtering is done, and the filtering that we did was low pass filtering, as you heard before. So what we had is in this ear and in that ear. No filters. What? Hello, how are you? Hello, how are you? Left ear filtered, and at the same time, simultaneously and very precisely synchronized with the left ear, we hear, hello, how are you? So in the left ear, you hear, in the right ear, you hear, hello, how are you? And then we swap them, okay? What's your guess? Any guesses? Well, we did some event response potential analysis, which is an electroencephalogram version an EEG study similar to what Andrew was doing, but probably different in some ways, because we looked at language and semantic processing signals. And we also did this, which is we took 30 students and put them through an fMRI as they were listening to the different signals. And the implications are huge. Chinese learners of English process English best with left ear filtered, right ear unfiltered audio signals. The load was the lightest, and the load was heaviest, which is also very interesting. It's actually a very telling statistic with the opposite configuration. So you swap, you put the filter in the right ear, the natural language in the left ear, the brain goes nuts. Doesn't like it. So we now have the means to make language learning biologically more effective or more efficient. We need to do this, of course, with non-tonal language. We need to extend this and we need to continue it, but that's the issue. And on top of that, when you do this stuff with groups, you're not actually tuning the bandwidth to the individual. And we may be able to tune the bandwidth to the individual and make it even better. So we're now experimenting with different contexts for improving language performance using this discovery. The first project was just completed in China, again, as part of a doctoral dissertation, performing a highly controlled experiment with double-blind performance ratings. Zhang Xiaobing discovered that students performing identical learning activities except for the form of physical input experienced a performance improvement of 6.73%. Not huge, but okay. Effect size was okay too. And if this is, we'll have to check it again. But you're getting 7% better for no work. Why not? And so we're going to be looking at not only this work in relation to the proficiency stuff that he was doing, but also for listening comprehension and reading comprehension. And there's an initial study done by one of my former students in Australia called Kathy Pegler many years ago. And she had some interesting results, but there's still a long, long way to go in this kind of work. I'm showing you that for fun. But there's another project done in China, Dr. Li Zhongmin, in correcting intonation patterns of Chinese learners of English. He recorded people doing simple listen, repeat exercises of intonation patterns in a teacherless setting When there were production errors, he corrected their utterances using voice synthesis technology and added some additional phonetic information. And I wrote a secret ingredient, you can guess what it is. And then, this is interesting, instead of using a native speaker model to practice with, he gave them back their own corrected voices to use as a model to practice with. So you hear your own voice. You don't hear me saying in French to you, "As-tu vu le bus?" You hear you saying to yourself, "As-tu vu le bus?" correctly, and it's got the secret ingredient, which is actually an amplified low frequency component, because when we hear ourselves through headphones, we don't hear ourselves as we hear ourselves in our heads when we speak. And so that compensates for that perceptual difference. Students, this approach again outperformed the control group significantly, and there's publications on that. And here's something which is actually within our grasp. In the future, with voice cloning becoming available and automatic pitch analysis, we may be able to do some self-managed computer-assisted language learning using this kind of...
There was no filtering, right?
Yes, there was. No, there was no filtering. There was no filtering. It was just listen to your own voice saying it correctly with an amplification of low frequency. So in a way, there was a little
lift,
a little emphasis on the intonation. But that was also to compensate for the different ways of listening. So let me talk about projects 4 and 5, and Anya is very closely involved with that. And 2 independent experiments in Indonesia. I'll say it for you. Dr. Lala Bumela Sulimantara and Dr. Lukman Baihaki, both CDU graduates, taught English academic writing. The first one was face-to-face and the second one was online. They used the reading for emotions model that Anya developed because she was the supervisor and they were working together with, why did I stop it there? A verbotonal approach to sensitize learners to the prosody and rhythms of academic writing. Academic writing is not rhythmless. Academic writing is actually filled with rhythmic expectations. They compared, now this is important, they compared outcomes with standard Indonesian academic writing courses based on a genre-based approach from systemic functional linguistics, SFL, as mandated by the Indonesian government. The Indonesian government says you will teach academic writing using SFL. You want to guess what happened? Anyone? Okay. Ratings were double-blind, again, because that's very important, and resulted in 2 discoveries. In both studies, the control groups, SFL, made no significant statistical progress. In fact, quite a lot of the students went backwards. And these courses were not taught by inexperienced people. These were people who were trained in the SFL model. The experimental groups greatly outperformed the control groups, and one improvement ratio being 11 to 1. 11 to 1 is 1,100% improved over the other group. And this is nice. We're getting a book out of it. A multi-author monograph with Palgrave is coming out called Multisensory Computer-Assisted Language Learning, and so on. Let's talk about Project 6 and 7, very briefly. In two other and much earlier experiments in China, Dr. He and Yang Yan taught intonation and pronunciation for university students, and Yang Yan was working with intonation, intelligibility, and speaking skills and growth of short-term memory in 8-year-old children, little kids. Not only did the intonation and intelligibility improve, which you would expect, right? I mean, if you're focusing on intonation, you would expect intonation to improve. Or maybe we'll see a bit later, perhaps you shouldn't have that hope. But learners also improved in fluency, which is far more than a pronunciation phenomenon. Fluency is not just saying the words right, it is pronouncing the words right. Fluency is about the ability to retrieve and organize linguistic output and then producing the correct stuff. That's not pronunciation. That goes beyond. And we know that there is a connection between intonation and grammar and so on, but this is rather more. And that's the other interesting thing is that the kids also improved in general English proficiency. They actually topped the government provincial examination with no training or coaching in the contents of the exam. They scored something like 90, I can't remember what the number was now. I think it was 95 or 96%. Whereas the control group, same school, same teacher, well, not the same teacher, but the same structure, scored around 75%, which was in the mid-range of the group. And interestingly enough, short-term memory, according to the test that they used, grew as well. Let me talk to you a little bit about a project which is happening right now. We're completing a study targeting Vietnamese university EFL learners. My student, Minh, I will not attempt to pronounce this one. I will need some intonation work before I can do it. Actually, more than intonation. And she may be online. Hello, if you're online. Okay, so here, the control group was taught by a specialist lecturer. Now, I'll give you a bit more detail on this one. It was taught by a specialist lecturer for a period of 10 weeks in a lab using a widely accepted form of pronunciation teaching in Vietnam. The usual sort of stuff that we think about when we think of pronunciation training. It combines an articulatory approach, tells people how to make those sounds by telling them where to put their lips, their mouth, their ears, and not their ears, their tongue and so on. Plus modeling, plus exposure to and repetition of a variety of native speaker models, covering all 44 phonemes of English and a range of intonation patterns. 10 weeks of this, 3 hours, 2.5 hours a week. An experimental group was trained in intonation only, using low-pass filtered signals like the one you heard, but only low-pass filtered signals with some repetition exercises with natural language as well. But that's it. The students were exposed to a total of 50 treated sentences. What's happening?
I don't worry.
Okay, the students were exposed to a total of 50 sentences over a period of 10 weeks. How many sentences a week? 5. And the sentences were presented by computer software according to a specially designed protocol in a teacherless lab environment.
Don't touch anything.
Okay. Now, Yes, well. Yes, he says, Mengi says it's the purpose of both experimental and controlled treatments was to lead to an improvement in overall pronunciation of all phonemes of English. So it's just a general pronunciation course. Special attention was to be paid to improvement in voiceless consonants, if there was to be any improvement, because voiceless consonants create a specific problem for Vietnamese speakers. Okay, just wait. Okay. Of course, variables were they were super tightly controlled, including time on task. Any performance ratings were anonymous, double-blind, and a mixed method study is being conducted at the moment. Okay, while these made up the primary focus of the study, several theoretical implications emerge if the experimental group actually outperforms the control group. First one, using filters is sufficient to bring about improvement. That's the first one, because we weren't quite sure of that. VT combines everything together, and now we've extracted one feature. Using filters is sufficient to bring about improvement. No multimodality is required. And this is a major modification to traditional verbotonal theory. 2, it is possible to use intonation, a voice phenomenon. Intonation is, right, it's the voice. Voiceless consonants don't have any voice. To impact, but it's interesting. If this works, then it's possible to use intonation to impact significantly on the production of voiceless consonants. 3, a teacherless learning environment is possible for improvement of pronunciation. You don't have to teach it. And perhaps it's even better. Exposure to and repetition of small numbers of specially treated model sentences is sufficient to bring about a significant change. You don't need a lot of examples. And if that is the case, then it may be necessary to seriously reassess the value of articulatory and repetition-based approaches. Here's a performance summary. I will not show you the full detail because it's too long and too complicated. It's not complicated, it's just too long. This is repetition of words. Control group, experimental group improvement. Experimental group improved by 161%. Yes, you can improve your pronunciation of all sounds of English, of the totality of sounds, not in terms of the group of sounds, not in terms necessarily of individual sounds, through intonation work. If you read aloud, the improvement is 557%. In other words, and look at the control group score. Do you see this? Do you see something special? There's a minus. They went backwards. The control group went backwards. And VL does not mean very low. VL means voiceless. Voiceless word reading. The voiceless consonants improved almost 181%. Look at the size differences. Look at the size differences in voiceless sentence reading. Just single sentences, 411%. Mean differences. And again, in voiceless passage reading, the control group went backwards, 7.94. So what does that say? The point in all of this is that the samples were randomized, anonymized, and rated blindly by the same person, or persons actually. So are all of these results good? Well, of course they are. But maybe we can do better. So far, the approach that we've used has been fairly coarse. And we've used group work done in a kind of one-size-fits-all way. We used intonation filtered at 320 hertz and so on. So essentially, we're still using a one-size-fits-all group-based approach. Well, with low-pass filtering, this is certainly the case, because we've arbitrarily set it at 320 hertz. It's reasonable to set it at 320, but it's not necessarily the best for everyone. It is better than no filtering, but not optimal. And the same is true of individual sounds, such as the ones that Wenfeng Wei did with his E and E studies. The filtering is somewhat more refined, but it's still likely to be too gross, too rough. How can we improve? Well, maybe part of the improvement is with the study which used the learner's own voice as the reference point. That may be one of the ways. And perhaps we can take the learner's own voice always as the starting point and tune the filters to the characteristics of their voice. For example, we can vary the low-pass cutoff to match the learner's F0. I mean, that's a starting point. Each of us has a different fundamental frequency, so we can match that as a signal that we feed them. Or we can tune the individual's phoneme's optimal bandpass settings more accurately. Remember I showed you this kind of meaningless graph with third of an octave and stuff like that? Your battery is running low, okay. Oops. It's gone into apoplexy. All right. Or we can use the learner's own cloned voice to provide the models. And of course, artificial intelligence will surely be of great assistance here, because we don't know how that will develop, but we can have expert systems handling the analysis and the production of models. And that will bring in, I think, a new era of individualization and personalization, at least in language learning, for that kind of work. But not just for pronunciation, perhaps also through the application of similar principles in other areas of learning. I mean, just as a silly example, if we think of grammar, okay, we can do something with that. Okay, further, these kinds of developments are amenable to approaches such as precision language education, which is based on precision medicine. It's a research-based refinement of individualization and personalization, and feeds directly into adaptive learning. Right? It goes beyond the processes we generally offer under the title of adaptive learning. And just as an example, we can imagine tuning the optimals for a sound or the cutoff points to digital filters according to learners' preferences or learners' performances. Such adjustments will make personalization even more accurate and supportive. Of course, the notion of precision language education extends beyond the phonetic area. So, I think we're living, as I said, we're living in exciting times. I think research and technology is pushing our imaginations to the limit. Perhaps not enough, but there are some signs of change. And these initiatives will result in a more robust, adaptable, sustainable, and successful future for the field. Andrew was saying success is a great motivator. I have two statements about that. The first one is nothing succeeds like success, as Ringling Circus or Barnum and Many, one of these guys from the circus used to say. I have another statement, which is nothing fails like failure. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Introduction.
I've been asked not to introduce Dr. Anya Line, but of course I will. I'll just keep it short, shall I? Dr. Anya Lyon teaches undergraduate and postgraduate courses in the College of Education or Faculty of Arts and Science at Charles Darwin University, Australia. Her expertise include language teaching, pedagogy, literacy education, and educational neuroscience. And over the past decade, Anya has been dedicated to developing methodologies that draw on evidence from a range of relevant neighbouring fields. So I'd like to introduce Anya to present her research, and I'm so sorry, Anya, that there's not much time left, but I think you can flexibly adapt with that. No, I think you're just a little bit over.
Oh, no, you weren't. You were fine.
All right, I'll learn that everybody.
That's okay.
who's
We've got,
guilty
just as a side note,
afterwards.
we do have quite a bit of time tomorrow.
I just need to focus, just wait.
Well, welcome, Anya.
So I want to share the screen, and life is difficult. So mainly, if you can follow it, whether we're sharing or not, because we want friends to be happy. And
Yes, it's working at the moment.
all right. So thank you for making time for me, and I try to be a little bit fast. I don't have to say everything I know or half of it, and I would love to find my PowerPoint. Really. Okay, so my main focus of today's talk is as follows, and honestly, the first two slides fix it. So if you're tired and your children are screaming, that's all you need to know. And the first two slides are pretty much the same, so that's funny, right? So here it goes. There's a lot of talk about neuroscience and the things that current technology allows us, but technology is one thing, and especially for us educators, as you can see, we try to grab it now and then when we can. That's sort of coming and happening more often. My problem with neuroscientists sometimes is when they work in literacy, that they don't understand literacy, and consequently their findings are skewed. So that's another issue. I'm just, right, so they seem to have a very conservative approach to what they are researching when it comes to literacy and education and language. Okay, so my concern really that I want to raise today is when you study those papers in literacy, and people have amazing findings. So I tell my students, say, like Emmy Norman to read Jaak Panksepp. I tell someone else to read something else I don't have time to read, books this thick. And they say, so what? There's interesting stuff coming out. People say, so what? And my question is, it's not necessarily so what, but what do you intend to do with it? So I noticed that typically the attitude is to think about how to use what neuroscience says to justify what we've been doing for the last 300 years, right? So my presentation today, to most of people who will watch it, especially those who know a lot about literacy training, will seem like crazy. But that's what you do. You study neuroscience, and then you take it seriously. And then you think, what does it mean for me? Or how can I support my future teachers with what I'm reading? And that requires imagination and putting things together, not just one thing. It's very hard to put just one thing. This guy looks at me, therefore he wants to marry me. No, he just looks at you. Then you have to sort of gather information to get to the point, yeah, he's interested in you, right? So not just one finding, but what it means actually, and how can I utilize it to honestly approach literacy pedagogy, not with an eye on the big professor or the whole entire team, what they are doing, because your job is to support future teachers. Your job is not to pay tribute to the past, which was doing whatever they were doing with whatever they had available, right? So there. So here I have this, I found it by accident, this film, and load reduction goes downwards. But I read studies where I'm thinking that maybe the way we do load reduction is not actually going downwards. Up to you to think about it. You can now go home and think about it honestly. What is it that I know that tells me I'm doing it downwards or upwards? And next slide. So the questions I have to myself, now obviously all of that which you hear today, it didn't happen on day one, and as a result I followed with research. That is an explicit reaction and reflection upon the last 10 years. So now I can say to you all these things. This is not how I started, but I did start by taking findings seriously and thinking, what does it mean for me? And testing. First conceptually and then in practice. So for example, questions like this I would raise to myself, on the basis of what evidence do we establish that our support for students is lessening the load, not increasing? What is the conceptual scope of our hypothesis? Oh, I read this, therefore I know. No, you just read this, you still don't know. And what evidence is included in our hypothesis and what did we include, right? So what do we include apparently and what we exclude, right? So there's a typo there that happens. So what did we include, what did we exclude? It's good to be honest to yourself. So these two particular men were, I mean, I've read a little bit, but these two particular men were very important for the things that I used. So V.S. Ramachandran and Ian McGilchrist. So they both will talk about perception and written about perception, and a lot of education studies doesn't talk about perception, but talks about attention. Whereas what these two people are saying, yes, attention matters, but also how we attend. We don't attend the same way. It does depend. So the key argument that these two men, I don't know, the key argument that is important for my speech today, produced by these men, and this is the quote from McGilchrist, the brain is asymmetrical. Well, so it took many more people than just Ramachandran and McGilchrist to say that. Each hemisphere has evolved for classical Darwinian reasons to pay a different kind of attention to the world, right? To pay a different kind of attention. Now, in our teaching, Andrew was talking about differentiating, and I'm talking also about differentiating. We talk about input, we give students particular strategies, particular tasks, without much of contextualizing those in relation to not just attention, but in relation to what attention do you want from students? What kind of attention do these tasks elicit from students, and why do you want that attention? So I'm just clicking here. Okay. So I'm referring here to McGilchrist because he's produced a book that took literally probably 50,000 of papers that he actually analyzed, and on the basis of, I don't know if it was 50,000, but probably, and 30?
Very large number.
Very large number of studies, and particular quotes that I have come up with here to give you a little bit of intellectual context come from him. So our brain is bilateral. Is it with bilateral we call it? And he says that different hemispheres do things differently. So it's not about what the hemispheres do, but that they do things differently, and that's very important. And therefore, they have different modes of attention. So the type of attention we pay determines what it is that we see. It's very interesting, I think. So perception is obviously the core of core importance to my study, and perception with regard to the form of attention we pay in order to see what we say. Now, I'm just putting it here for the record, so it's for people to read. This is Ramachandran's study. It's very amusing. I'm surprised why it took so many decades for someone to come up with these. So basically, these dialogue represent how people think or how people interact with others when, say, the right hemisphere has a damage to it. So these dialogues clearly reflect that people with the right hemisphere damage sit in the left hemisphere, and the left hemisphere is the hemisphere that knows everything. And when it's questioned, it hates you, right? If any questioning of the left hemisphere elicits anger. It doesn't like it. It is a happy hemisphere because it knows everything. So the person with the right hemisphere damage can clap with one hand. Right, so very interesting statements. So the hemispheric difference in attention is beyond dispute. The nature of attention indisputably changes what it is that comes to our attention. And also the left and right hemispheres are actually connected with the corpus callosum increasingly less, and that connection, what he says, is largely inhibitory, preventing conflation. So I put some stuff to ChatGPT, like a lot of text, and I said, can you create a sort of short description of the differences between the left and right hemisphere? And you can clearly see that the right hemisphere is the one that comprehends, that connects, that puts things in perspective, embeds things in the real world. It's a hemisphere of experience, not representation. So it's a hemisphere which McGilchrist calls the hemisphere of the territory, as opposed to the map. There's nothing wrong, he says, with the map, but your life is not a map. Your life is territory, and you're talking about it as a map. Pardon me, Amy?
Yeah, no, yeah, thank you.
And I think I put this thing on the right, in red, which is the right hemisphere is more interested in what has personal relevance for me, while the left hemisphere is in what is impersonal. Schema, schemata, categorization, the things that language does. I love you. It's a word, and only your interaction with me can actually provide evidence for you to believe in it or not. So drawings. Well, you draw with the left, right hemisphere, or with both. So clearly, the right one is, when you turn off the left hemisphere, you can actually turn off someone's hemispheres, and the right one looks quite happy. I don't know, flowy. So I've got these things here. I don't have enough time to. But one of the things I wanted to say here, that Ramachandran calls the right hemisphere the devil's advocate, since it has this capacity to detect new information, detect anomaly. it's on the lookout for anything erroneous, right? It can see things that the left hemisphere denies. I'm going past this. So these are the qualities of learning that we're looking for, right? I'm not looking for definition, connectedness, contact, any of those. I'm not interested in those. We've done it in textbooks. I'm not interested in it. I'm just here looking at information that I found in text and also on YouTube in podcasts created by these people. So learning process, we're looking for a learning process that engages systems enabling detection of anomaly and new information, comprehensions, are on the lookout for novelty, embed elements into context, deal with uniqueness. Interactivity is interactivity here literally means between the high level and low level systems, which is the interaction between the right and the left hemispheres. The right hemisphere actually wants to talk to the left doesn't want to talk to the right, which is very interesting. We want systems that trigger reorganization of what Andrew Lyon calls entrenched systems or meanings. Entrenched because they therefore are survival in the left hemisphere, so that you don't always have to think, right? But sometimes you have to see more than what you need, than what you know. I do have a hypothesis, basically stating that only a student can reduce the processing load for himself. Now you'll see from my talk what I mean by this. I'm not saying that teachers shouldn't exist and we should not create support systems, but ultimately it is only the student that can do it. If you knew how to do it and control all variables, you would have a Nobel Prize today without any process like, vetting and all of this that goes around. So no one else can do it for him or her. How students pay attention depends on whether they are permitted to draw on the resources of their own. You can't create meaning from someone else. It's always from whatever you have. So whether they are permitted to draw on the resources of their own, discovering limitations, certainly, but also discovering in those comparisons and contrasts, which they can use to shed light on the problems of their encounter. I'm running a little bit. So in my research, I'm looking at this. So basically what I'm really saying is that the objective of pedagogic research, especially in literacy and second language learning, I'm not able to talk about other disciplines because I have absolutely no experience in those. So it's to develop and test strategies, develop that. It is not something that is going to come from an article that says that the right hemisphere is actually a hemisphere that detects anomaly or new information. It's just not enough. You still have to develop and design and test strategies for targeting the right hemisphere, enabling our students to bypass the left hemisphere, what they know, go to the right hemisphere and look at the context, that the conditions that affect them from that perspective, so that maybe if they later on certainly will go into the left hemisphere and draw on resources provided by left hemisphere, still they do it from a higher level perspective. So how to start, right? That's what I was saying. We need to ask afresh how to do it rather than, oh, we've always done it. How did you do it? We just told them. We're all modeled what to do, right? So there's no student there. There's only you there. All right, so this is a very good research. As you can see here, so these people are extremely famous. So I don't know Otten. I must say I read his paper only because I was trying to find anything written by Anil Seth. But you can see that the input goes into the eye and nothing happens. It is the top-down and inside-out connections that actually convey, they say, predictions, or actually superior in meaning making or making sense out of reality rather than whatever input comes in, right? So it's those top-down and inside from within connections that look at the world not what you as a teacher decided that would be very important for students to see and understand. So in my research, I do a number of things that I haven't done any neuroscience tests with any of those systems that enable to actually explore what actually happens to students' brains. But I'm looking at emotions at emotions as an organizing system of text, of comprehension, and also leading maybe critical thinking and critical reading of text and critical production. So I've got a definition of emotions. So from Jordan Peterson, maps of meaning can be defined as subjective sensations that individuals experience when they encounter situations with motivational significance. You get affected only when things matter, right? If I told someone I hate them, they would look at me like, who cares? Right? So you have emotions when things matter. And people like Imordino Young or Gottlieb, what they do, they produce a series of papers indicating very clearly that emotions are not integrated seriously, not in education so much, but in academic education. People cannot see that emotions can have an organizing function, and in fact stronger than, say, for example, I believe, than linguistics, for example, because linguistics is a low-level description. Doesn't matter how much you think that you go to the meaning, it is still low-level. It is a descriptive system. It has nothing to do with someone's presence in the world. I'm not saying that they don't have a place. I'm just saying the place is down the road. So this is what I really wanted to share. I'm not going to show you this. So these are the studies that Andrew was talking about by my PhD students. Literally, I mean, anyone who wants to question SFL teachers in that study, you do that. But I want to question the people who are using my methodology. It is so robust. It is so easy that even my students who hardly, they came here from Indonesia and just applied it. Certainly, I was part a little bit of some of the teaching in those classes with students in Indonesia, both in Sumatra and in Borneo. But yes, I wasn't doing the 100% of the load. So Lala had a very good outcome. You can see that in the post-test in his study, the group actually not only exceeded the other group, but actually caught up and exceeded and improved as a whole, not just a little bit. That was Lukman's study. You have pre-test and post-test results, all double-blind studies. Now, so let's have a look, the nitty-gritty, right? So it's 6 o'clock. Do you want to sit for 10 minutes through that? Yes? Okay, so 10 minutes of this. So we have this paper written by Caldwell and White in 2017, published in the Australian Journal of Language and Literacy. And basically Caldwell and White say that Australian NAPLAN literacy examiners they have problems. They have problems, they don't really assess properly, and so on. So there is a story here written by a student, and they have actually included those tags of students in the paper, and they wanted to give their own take on those texts. So basically we have a story here about Zip. Zip is the new kid at my school. He's a Zordian from Zord. He even has his spaceship parked somewhere, and Zip invited him to visit his spaceships, and he said, oh, it was so great. Then he invited Zip, and then they went swimming and to the lake, and something amazing happened, and we finished. So this is an accurate recount of my 2 days with Zip. How do you feel when reading this text? You go like, what? If you're a linguist, and you will say it, if you're a linguist, descriptive linguist, you would say, perfect story, very well done, everything is in place, these actors, there's this field, there's something else, whatever they see as important. But look into your heart. You read that, and the ending of it, I read this only so that you could tell me, oh, you did well? And you know that. So the examiner said, well, orientation was there, no complication, no resolution, because the NAPLAN examiner claims that every narrative must have complication and resolution, something that Cadwell and White will be contesting. So the examiner is not happy with this text and gave it some low grade, like 2 out of 4 or something like this. I can't remember, 1 of maybe 2, I don't know. Clearly not relevant to my life. So what they said, what Cadwell and White said, and these are top linguists working with the systemic functional linguistics and grammar and developing aspects of it further. So what they said about this text, we contend that this is in fact an engaging and well-told story. Might be, but the ending was flat. Or I'm weird, right? When it is dealt with on its own terms, and especially when it's evaluated and attitudinal aspects are given due consideration. We note here that a central theme tying the different parts of the story together is the way in which the alien, Zip, is superior to his human counterparts. In terms of his material goods, his failure to be impressed by the state of the art of the kitchen of the protagonist's mother, and so on. This is carried through amusingly to the story's final episode, but not ending, friend. Why don't you say it, that the ending is flat? Why can't we just say it? I understand that the 10-year-old wrote it, or 12-year-old. The point is the story is flat. So what they are saying, that Zip is superior to his human counterpart. Great, it might be, but I can't see it from the text that somehow mattered, because what mattered was to tell you to give you the accurate recount of the time with Zip. That's what I hear. At the end of the day, that's what I hear. So what happens here? Zip and Zip are connected, right? We started with Zip, we finished with Zip. We didn't start with the Zordian, with superhuman capacities, and we didn't end with superhuman capacities. So maybe somewhere in the middle, there are superhuman capacities, but somehow at the ending of it, it's not. So I'm just analyzing here for my reasons, and I'm not going to give you the reasons because I'll sit here for 6 hours, right? I'm just showing to you how much you can learn by integrating emotions and how little you can learn when all you do is looking at the text through the prism of grammar or systemic functional grammar. The text that to them looks okay, to me it says the ending. If it said maybe something to the effect, so this is an accurate recount of my 2 days with an alien, then you go, yeah, I see it, funny, right? That's just one word. If you are conscious why you're writing the text, which is the audience, which is exactly what the Australian curriculum says. You're not talking to yourself, you're talking to the audience. So think why the heck you produced that. You produced it to astound us. You didn't produce it to tell us, oh, here it is, you asked for a recount, here's your recount. Can I go home? So that's what it is. The wow feeling when we read about the Zordia should have been maintained for the ending of it, right? So it is best to expect amazing, surprising things when, so this is implied moral, which I just sort of wrote for myself here. But this is a bad story. You can't read it. It's a story that is, none of my friends, I think Amy read it and so on, people around me have read it, this particular story, and I've asked about 5 people about the interpretation of it. So basically it's a story about, I've always dreamt or something like this. She always wanted the purple boats. I can't really see the text here. So she always wanted the purple boats that her grandmother had. And finally she got them. However, when she got them, her grandmother died. You feel it? If you love your grandmother or your mother and you're here and my mother died, what do you feel? Like, I think I'm shaking. I just went through the death of my own mother. So when I hear that someone close died to you, literally, I've got something going through my blood, I goosebumps and everything. So, and then there is a story. It starts. I woke up slowly and things happened to her. So what happened to her was she woke up and she ended up in the world where she found this man and this, anyway, I can't read it because it's such a small text, but maybe people will be able to read for themselves. Confusing things were happening. Meanwhile, her boots started to be really, really shiny and giving out some magical lights and leading her forward. They started to actually lead her, give her direction. She followed that direction and nothing good happened. She met a man who told her he made those boots. And she is in the land of the dead. And while she was in the land of the dead, she looked at the shoes and they were still glowing and, like sort of positive glow was coming out of them. And she was asking herself, why am I here? Why am I here? And she says, I know, because I want my grandmother back. It's a lovely ending. And I want to show you something. It basically starts with, okay. So basically what happens here, the examiners didn't like the story. The examiners said, according to the marking guide, the lovely purple boots text scored reasonably high, 3 out of 4, text structure. So they still didn't like the text structure and was annotated with the following comment. Story does not conclude, but introduces a new complication. So I don't know how saying I want my mother back is a new complication. So people are getting confused because you have this template of systemic functional linguistics. You need to somehow apply it. And now the critics of NAPLAN examiners, Cadwell and White, will have a different opinion. And who is in between? It's the student. So Cadwell and White say, the text is a complete effective story genre, not a complication resolution narrative, but rather an anecdote. The protagonist is relieved to discover that she's dead. I don't know, did you think she died? I know, it's amazing. Since this will enable her to be reunited with her beloved grandmother. Anecdotes invoke some remarkable disruption to usuality, which is not resolved but simply reacted to. So, if I may just say, the people who wrote that this is not a complication resolution text, it's just a narrative, an anecdote, right? These are the same people that when I was pushed by the reviewers of my paper, because I published some, I'm in the process of publication of some paper, bits of it I'm introducing here. They said to me, read this guy, Peter White. So I read. And he says, he's quoting Voloshinov. And Voloshinov says that every text is a break of silence, which means you open your mouth to clarify something, to create it on it, because you see the reason. There's a complication that you need to address. Every text has a complication. Maybe not if you do linguistic description, because linguistic description requires differentiation for whatever reason they need to. But between you and me, every text has a complication, and resolution may I don't know, I'm just not going to call it, but every text has a complication. It's a response to a complication. It's a tennis game. It's not like exchanging balls. I do it in a way by predicting also your response to it, right? So I'm thinking, right? So look at this. Do not ask me why I call complication disturbance or problem. I don't call it problem, I call it disturbance. That's what came to me when I designed the model. So we have the main disturbance, which is in red, but look how many disturbances follow underneath. How many smaller conflicts? So the first one was, I didn't expect the grandma to die, right? So that's sort of, it starts like, I always wanted that, but I didn't want it to come to me this way, right? And then there's a bit of commentary on it, and then, so what happened next, right? Well, I've got them now. So what happened next? Well, an unusual way of waking up, right? And then things happened, and there was another problem, and there was another problem, and then there was another problem now in brown, I think. This is brown color, just in case you can't tell. And then, and look at this. We finish with the resolution, and then moral is implied. Right, so the resolution here, I was in the land of the dead because what I want is my grandmother. I'll just take you a little bit further here. I'm not explaining to you the method today because I don't want to. Look how much we got out of this text, simply by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 moves, right? 4 of which get, so focus is 1, and resolution and moral is 1. But the problems are going that way, from the main to the next to the next. Now, as I said, methodology here and how you work with emotions, I would indicate a little bit, but this is not my job here. I just wanted you to see how much you can get from this text, not just what did they have, orientation, main event, and coda. And how do you teach it? Now you're writing the middle of a text. And the kids go like, oh my God, how do you write the middle of the text? I mean, not just the main event. My question, of course, is why is the main event by the linguist identified as her waking up by herself as opposed to her grandmother dying? That was the event that triggered everything. Everything was just a following. So we have a lovely structure here. So you can see, like in the thesis, when you write the thesis, your solution is a response to the problem. I didn't expect my grandma die. I want my grandma back. All that stuff that happened to me in between is because I want my grandma back, right? So it's lovely finish. It's like Zordian, and that's what happens to you when you spend 2 days with a Zordian, right? So it's a kind of connected. So there's a beautiful frame. So obviously the things in the middle you can see here, between the 2 columns which have the story, is your discussion with your students. You can have a discussion. You can have a discussion about from the emotional point of view. How did you find the story? Did you like it? What happened? What did the story communicate? Things like this, and then you can go into the detail, greater detail, and you can look. How do you think? Where did you find? What did you find in the story that made you feel this way, or makes you believe that this story is communicating this and this message, right? And then you can go sentence by sentence practically. I didn't finish all the emotions because it was clogging the text. Because these are not written in stones, the emotions that the students were feeling. These are just what they will tell you. And then you can have a discussion. You can have a bonfight. You can look into other texts. Where else did you see things like this? Right? So you can now go down the rabbit hole, right? You can do this linguistics analysis and whatever else exists in the world, but you start from high up. Now, obviously, I'm not a saint. I asked ChatGPT. I said to ChatGPT, you see all these disturbances? Just create an emotional map by identifying the meanings of each of those disturbances in relation to the journey of the protagonist. And it did. Unexpected death, anticipation, clashes with loss, startling awakening, enigmatic power of the boots. Right? You can read it for yourselves once I finish the talk. So it's lovely. It actually, these are many disturbances are punctuating the journey. And you can ask the ChatGPT to punctuate it from the perspective of the protagonist, how the protagonist might feel, or from your perspective as a reader. I've done that too. In fact, I told ChatGPT my method of analysis. And so I've put the emotions here, so I don't have the time to actually go into it today. This is, what is it? This one is from the perspective of the reader, right? How the reader actually expect, how does ChatGPT expect actually the reader to feel for each of those stages of the story, the disturbances. I don't talk much about that, but if you want to now with students, test the quality of your analysis, right? I do more things than this, but if you want to test the quality of your analysis, you can actually use Ramachandran's neurological theory of aesthetic experience. He identifies particular qualities of aesthetics. I've done aesthetic analysis following him, and you can see whether you can actually try to respond to all these features of aesthetic experience by Ramachandran and Hirstein. Everybody says Ramachandran, not Hirstein. That's because Ramachandran was on Facebook, on podcasts. Hirstein was gone. That's what happens when you give it to someone else. And you also can create a summary. So following my model of this, and look at this, moral is first. How often when I put the moral there, not because I'm a great writer, but because I've already analyzed enough of text to know that, for example, sophisticated text like, say, academic texts, say in neuroscience, they are very often taken now by journalists to make the text and the message of those texts familiar. I'm not familiar, to bring it closer to the public, right? And there are ways of actually doing this. And you wouldn't want the final message to be on the bottom of a story because very often, people will not get that far to read it. So you put it right there. So I stole this sort of strategy. And I said, the story explores the following themes. This is about summary. It does this, something happens, then dialogue, right, so unexpectedly her grandma passes away, that's a disturbance. Dialogue is the literature reviews, the perspective on the problem, leaving her with fond memories of a gift, right? So grandma passed, and a perspective on the death. She was regretful, right? And then what happened next? And resolution, right? So if you can, from all these analysis, create a summary that makes all the analysis, whether aesthetics or whether the area analysis, makes it actually still possible to summarize in a consistent way, and you don't lose the message, then probably you're running well. I actually took an anecdote. Sorry for that. I took the anecdote because the Zordian thing was an anecdote, and I took an anecdote about Mark Twain, who entered a local barber shop, right? And then the barber says to him, so Mark Twain says, I'm the first time here. Barber says, oh, that's great. Mark Twain is in town. You might get the ticket. However, there is not enough. The tickets are sold. So you'll be just having a standing place. And he says, oh, that's my luck. Whenever this guy talks, I have to stand. So funny. I asked ChatGPT to actually do the analysis using my systems, and it does. Text analysis, beautiful. And then I think I asked also for emotional analysis as well. So I didn't do that. Now, I wanted to show you something. You see how lovely you can get so much when you look at higher order systems of organization, which is emotion, which is aesthetics. I do other things as well, which is I blend different modalities, not enough time for that. But you have so much richness. Look at the vocabulary that comes out. First, it comes out from students, and then we can actually look into ChatGPT and come up with better words and start integrating those words into our vocabulary so that our concept of emotion, not self-awareness and all the other things that happen too, but our concepts relating to emotions and also for retelling the story and talking about the story get expanded. But, I did this workshop online that was produced by Derevianka, who is one of the systemic functional linguist people. I just found it, I couldn't, I followed the whole workshop, not only, but look at this, how messy it is. You don't even know why these things are written here and picked in the text of a student. It is just, this is from the opposition, from systemic functional linguistics, from that. So this was their analysis of the text by pointing out the different elements that were in the text, and it was a good thing that these phrases were there. I just can't see I'm glad that these phrases were there. I just don't see the power of those phrases in the text. It's not enough to produce a linguistic description. You need to have several steps of talking about the text in order to see the power or the relevance of those particular phrases that Derivianka and people from the systemic functional linguistic movement actually appreciate. So anyway, and seeing so many arrows this way, it is very confusing. So that's it for me. I've done other text analysis. I don't have the time to show you, but thank you so much.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask everyone to join me in thanking the three presenters for today, and thank you for your time and your energy and wisdom and expertise. So I know there's not many of us, but I was just like, thank you, Andrew and Anya. It's been brilliant. I feel a bit energized just from all the different conversations, and we'll continue this tomorrow. So thank you.
Somewhere else.
Yes, somewhere else. A little bit more intimate.